My name is Hannah, 31 years old, a registered nurse working trauma at St. Michael's Hospital in Toronto, and I'd just finished a 14-hour overnight shift when I got into my car and started the 4-hour drive north to Muskoka for Christmas. I had been awake for 19 hours. My scrubs smelled like antiseptic and burnt coffee, but I didn't care. I hadn't been home since Thanksgiving, and my grandfather had called me 3 weeks ago and left a voicemail that I had listened to 4 times. His voice was thin, scratchy, like someone had turned the volume down on him. He just said, "I'd love to see you for Christmas, sweetheart. I made your favorite shortbread." He didn't ask. He didn't demand. He just said he'd love to see me. That was enough. I stopped at an Elsie Bow in Barrie and grabbed a bottle of Pinot Noir. I picked up a bag of spearmint-flavored candy canes because my grandfather always kept a bowl of them on the coffee table in December. I grabbed a small container of vanilla pudding because his appetite had been poor since the pancreatic cancer diagnosis in September, and I figured he could keep that down. When I turned onto the gravel lane that wound through the birch trees toward the house, I noticed the porch light wasn't on. My grandfather always left the porch light on. He'd been leaving it on for me since I was 7 years old, and my parents used to drive me up here for the summer. I told myself the bulb had probably burned out. I told myself that until I opened the front door. The cold hit me before anything else. Not the outside cold, the kind that clings to your coat and fades when you step inside. This was inside cold. The bone-deep cold of a house that had been sitting empty, unheated, for days. I could see my own breath in the entryway. The digital thermometer mounted on the wall near the coat hooks read 9 degrees Celsius. Then the smell reached me. I am a trauma nurse. I have held pressure on wounds that don't bear describing. I have sat beside people in the final hours of septic shock. I know what the body smells like when it stops being cared for. That smell was in my grandfather's house, sharp and sour and wrong. I dropped the LCBO bag. The bottle hit the hardwood and rolled but didn't break. I ran. He was in his recliner in the living room. The curtains were drawn. The only light came from the digital clock on the cable box, a thin red glow that turned everything the color of an old photograph. My grandfather, who had spent 40 years as a high school woodshop teacher in Sudbury, who had built every piece of furniture in this house with his own hands, who had a handshake so firm it used to make my childhood friends laugh nervously, he was curled into himself in that chair. The knit blanket, the thin one from the hall closet, was pulled up to his chin. He was shivering, not trembling. Shivering. The full body kind that means the body is fighting to generate heat it doesn't have. "Grandpa," I said. My voice came out steadier than I expected. Nurse voice, clinical and calm on the outside, everything else on the inside. "Grandpa, I'm here." He opened his eyes. It took a moment for them to focus. When they did and he recognized me, something crossed his face that I have thought about every day since. It wasn't just relief. It was shame. Deep, private shame. The kind a man who has never asked anyone for anything feels when he is found like this, by someone he loves. "Hannah," he rasped. His lips were dry and cracked. There was a smear of dry blood at the corner of his mouth where the skin had split. "You came." "Of course I came," I said, already calculating. Hypothermia risk. Dehydration. Last medication dose. Wound assessment. I touched his forehead. Cold and clammy. I looked down. I won't describe it in detail. I'll just say that he had not been able to get to the bathroom, and that he had been sitting in it for a very long time. "How long has the heat been off?" I asked. He closed his eyes. "They left Wednesday," he said. "I think." It was Saturday night. My husband and his mother had left my grandfather alone, without heat, without food, without his pain medications administered properly, for 3 days. In December. In northern Ontario. I got the heat on first. The baseboard heaters groaned and clicked awake. Then I went to him. I won't detail the cleanup except to say I was professional, and he was brave, and neither of us said much while it was happening. I filled the old clawfoot tub with warm water, testing it on the inside of my wrist the way I do for patients, and I helped him in and helped him out and got him into a pair of my husband's thick wool socks and his own flannel pajamas from the top drawer of his dresser where they'd always been. I made him a mug of chicken broth from the carton I found in the back of the pantry. He sipped it slowly, both hands wrapped around the mug, eyes closed. When he was settled and almost asleep, I went to the kitchen to get him a glass of water. That's when I found the note. It was on the kitchen island, a post-it note stuck to the fruit bowl which contained 2 blackened bananas and nothing else. My husband's handwriting. He has this particular way of writing that always looked to me like someone in a hurry, letters half-formed, words slanting down the page like they're trying to escape. I peeled the note off the bowl. Took Mom to Tremblant for the week. Figured you'd be up to check on Grandpa anyway. You're the nurse. Handle it. Merry Christmas. That was it. No phone number. No, we left food. No, we pre-filled his meds. No, the heat is off because Mont-Tremblant. My husband had taken his mother to a ski resort in Quebec for the week. They had packed up their bags and driven 5 hours to ski and eat at fondue restaurants and sleep in a chalet with a fireplace. While my 80-year-old grandfather, who was dying of pancreatic cancer, sat 9 degrees in the dark because they had turned the thermostat down to save on the electric bill. I read the note 3 times. Then I set it very carefully back on the fruit bowl. I went back to the living room and sat on the ottoman across from my grandfather's chair until his breathing told me he was asleep. Then I went to the kitchen counter where his medications were lined up in amber bottles. This is where I have to slow down because what I found next changed everything. There were 8 bottles. I know all his medications. I had gone over his treatment plan with his palliative care team at the Sudbury Hospital 3 months ago. The morphine oral solution was the 3rd bottle from the left. I picked it up. Standard bottle. His name on the label. His dosage. His pharmacist's name. I pulled the dropper out. I am a nurse. I have drawn morphine solution hundreds of times. I know what it looks like. I know the slight amber tint, the faint bitterness you can smell if you bring it close. I know how it moves in the dropper. Slightly viscous. Just slow enough. The liquid in this bottle was clear. It ran off the dropper in a thin, fast stream. I touched 1 drop to my tongue. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. I went very still. I checked the morphine bottle again. Half full. Someone had replaced the solution with water. Not emptied it. Replaced it, refilled it, so that it looked full, so that no one would notice at a glance. This had taken deliberate effort. My grandfather had stage 4 pancreatic cancer. Anyone who has cared for someone with that diagnosis knows what the pain is like. It is not managed with Tylenol. It is not managed with willpower. The morphine wasn't optional. It was the difference between enduring and not enduring. Someone had replaced it with water. I walked slowly back to the living room. My grandfather was awake again, watching me. He had that look in his eyes, the one I recognized from my time in trauma. The look of a person who has been in pain for so long that they've gone somewhere else inside their head, just to survive it. "Grandpa," I said, "when did you last have your pain medication? Your real one?" He was quiet for a moment. "Wednesday," he said, before they left. Wednesday. 3 days. 3 days of pancreatic cancer pain, untreated, while they were doing ski runs and sitting in hot tubs. He saw the look on my face. He reached out and took my hand. His grip was weaker than it had been 2 months ago, but he held on. "I need to tell you something," he said. His voice was low, but steadier than it had any right to be. "I've been meaning to tell you for a while. Sit down." I sat. He looked at the wall above the fireplace. There was a rectangular outline where something used to hang, the wallpaper slightly darker, protected from years of light. A bare nail stuck out. "There was a shadow box there," he said. "My Teacher of the Year awards. The commendation from the school board. 40 years of teaching." He paused. "Your husband's mother took it down in October. Said it made the place look cluttered. I heard her tell him the frames alone were worth something at the antique market in Huntsville." I looked at the empty wall. "Grandpa, I'm not telling you to upset you," he said. "I'm telling you because I need you to understand the full picture before I show you what I have to show you." He asked me to go to the cedar chest in his bedroom. 2nd drawer. Under the winter sweaters, I found a manila envelope. Inside was a document from a law firm in Sudbury, 12 pages, a revocable living trust established 7 years ago, listing my grandfather as truster and his attorney as trustee until he passed. I flipped to the asset schedule. The Muskoka property, paid off, assessed at $740,000, a TFSA and RRSP portfolio through RBC, accumulated over 40 years of teaching and 40 years of conservative saving, total value $1.1 million. A GIC at TD Bank that had been quietly compounding since 1998, $80,000. I sat on the edge of his bed and stared at the papers for a long time. When I came back to the living room, I sat down across from him again. He looked at me the way he used to look at me when I was 12 years old and had figured out a puzzle he'd set for me. Quietly pleased. Tired, but pleased. Your husband thinks I have a small pension and a property that needs a new roof, he said. I let him think that. He took a slow breath. I wanted to see what kind of man he was first. I wanted to see if he stayed because he wanted to, or because he was waiting. He looked at his hands. I've seen enough now. Grandpa, I said. My voice cracked on the second syllable. I want to change the beneficiary, he said, before there isn't time. I want it to go to you. And I want half of it, the GIC, to go to the palliative care unit at Health Sciences North. Because those nurses and doctors treated me like a person, not a burden. He looked at me very directly. Can you get Patricia on the phone? Patricia was his attorney. I had met her twice at family events. A sharp woman in her 60s who wore sensible boots and had a way of listening that made you feel like every word was being filed away for future reference. It was 11 o'clock on a Saturday night. I called anyway. She answered on the third ring. I told her what I'd found. The cold house. The medication. I told her what my grandfather wanted. There was a brief silence, the sound of her thinking. I can be there by 9 tomorrow morning, she said. Don't let him sign anything tonight. Let him rest. I'll bring the amendment documents. I sat with him while he slept. Around midnight, I remembered my phone. I hadn't looked at it since I'd dropped my bag in the entryway. I had 6 texts from my husband, all from Thursday. The thread read like a man who had made a decision and was looking for permission after the fact. Just letting you know, took Mom up to Mont-Tremblant. Surprise trip. She needed a break. Grandpa was fine when we left. He's tough. You're off this weekend, right? Can you check on him? He's probably just tired, you know how he gets. Call me when you're up there. Nothing from Friday. Nothing from Saturday. I scrolled up to our last real conversation 2 weeks ago. He had asked me to transfer money from our joint account to cover the resort deposit. He said it was a work function. He said he put it back before Christmas. The transfer was $2,400. I opened our TD app. The joint account had a balance of $312. I did the math slowly, the way I do when I'm very tired and need to be accurate. I had deposited my last 2 nursing paychecks into that account. 14 days of 12-hour shifts, $5,800. Between the resort, the food, the lift passes, the incidentals, it was gone. He had taken my paychecks, the money I'd earned during the weeks I was working overnight trauma while he was watching television, and he had used them to take his mother skiing. I sat on the kitchen floor for a while. I'm not embarrassed to admit that. I sat on the floor with my back against the cabinets, and I let myself feel all of it. The cold, the betrayal, the morphine bottle still sitting on the counter with its fake clear contents. I let it move through me the way they teach you in nursing school to process things you can't fix immediately. Feel it, name it, then stand up. I stood up. There was work to do. By the time Patricia arrived Sunday morning, I had been awake for 30 hours. I had photographs of the thermostat reading, the empty food cupboards, the morphine bottle. I had a voice recording of my grandfather telling me what day they had left and what they had and hadn't arranged before going. I had the text thread. I had the bank statements printed from the TD app. I had gone to my neighbor down the lane, a retired schoolteacher named Vera who had lived 2 properties over for 25 years. I brought her a coffee and I asked her gently what she had seen. She told me she had watched the SUV leave on Wednesday afternoon. She had seen my husband help his mother with her bags. She said she had looked for the lights in Grandpa's house that night and seen nothing. She had worried, she said. She had told herself it wasn't her place. She had been eating herself up about it ever since. I turned my phone face up on her kitchen table and told her the voice recorder was running if she didn't mind. She didn't mind. She said everything she'd told me twice more, slowly and clearly. Patricia sat across from my grandfather in the living room Sunday morning with her briefcase open and her reading glasses on. She went through the trust documents page by page. She explained the amendment plainly, the way good lawyers do, without condescension, without rushing. My grandfather listened. He asked 2 questions. Then he asked for the pen. His hand was shaking. The tremor had been getting worse over the past month. He gripped the pen and took a breath and signed his name the way he had always done, in full, deliberate, unhurried. Warren Douglas Aldridge. Every letter present and accounted for. Patricia witnessed it. I witnessed it. She photographed the pages and saved copies to her encrypted client drive. "I'll file Monday morning when the registry opens," she said. "It's airtight." "Good," my grandfather said. He handed the pen back and looked at the window. Snow had started coming down again, soft and steady, the kind that settles rather than blows. "Do you think it would be too much trouble," he said, "to make some tea?" I made tea. I made it exactly the way he taught me. Bag in the mug first. Not the water. Leave it steep for exactly 4 minutes. Splash of milk, no sugar. We sat together in the living room and I told him about the strangest call I'd had in my last shift. A man who'd come in at 3 in the morning convinced his appendix had burst because of hot wings, and it had actually burst, which was remarkable. And my grandfather laughed, a real laugh, low and wheezy and entirely him. Patricia left after an hour. We were alone again. By Monday morning, he was weaker. It was the kind of change that happens gradually and then all at once. His breathing had shifted overnight, slower and more deliberate, the kind of change I recognized from work and had been quietly dreading for weeks. I moved the wing chair from his bedroom out to the living room so I could sit beside him. I held his hand. When he was awake, we talked. When he wasn't, I sat quietly and let him rest. Around 2 in the afternoon on Monday, he said, "Rhubarb." He said it clearly, out of nowhere, eyes still closed. "What?" I said. "Your grandmother used to make rhubarb crumble," he said. "Every Christmas." The whole house smelled like it by noon. I looked in the pantry. There was no rhubarb, canned or otherwise, but there was a can of sliced peaches and a half bag of rolled oats and a stick of butter. I went to the kitchen and I made the closest thing I could. Butter and oats and brown sugar in a pan until it smelled like something real. Peaches heated in a saucepan with cinnamon. I brought it to him in a small bowl and I blew on the first spoonful until it was cool enough and he tasted it and was quiet for a moment. "Not quite," he said. "No," I agreed, "but close," he said. I fed him 4 more spoonfuls. Then he turned his head to the side, and I put the bowl down and held his hand again. He talked a little more. He told me things I won't repeat here because they were only for me. He told me he was not afraid. He told me he was not afraid. He told me he was glad I had come. He said he was sorry that I was going to have a hard few months. I told him I was a trauma nurse and I was used to hard. He made a small sound that might have been a laugh. At 4:17 in the morning on Tuesday, he took a long breath and did not take another. I sat with him for a few minutes. Then I stood up, the way he would have wanted, and I straightened my back and I looked at him for a long time. He looked like himself. The pain was completely gone from his face. He looked like the man who had taught me to use a jigsaw when I was 9 and had never once made me feel like I couldn't do something. I called the funeral home at 5. Then I called Patricia. Then I sat on the porch in the dark with a cup of coffee and watched the snow come down over the birch trees. They came back Thursday. I heard the SUV before I saw it, the particular sound of the all-season tires on the gravel lane. I was sitting in my grandfather's recliner when the car doors slammed. I heard my mother-in-law's voice first, that particular carrying quality it had, commenting on the snow, commenting on the cold, asking my husband whether the pipes might have frozen. I heard my husband say, "Jaina will have sorted it." My name is Hannah. The front door opened and they came in with their duffel bags and their ski jackets and the smell of 4 days of resort life. My husband came around the corner into the living room first, already looking at his phone. He looked up. I was sitting in the recliner in my nursing uniform. Not scrubs, full RN dress uniform, which I almost never wear, which I had driven back to Toronto to retrieve on Tuesday evening and then driven back here Wednesday morning. Name badge, stethoscope, everything. On the dining room table in front of me, I had laid out the following, in order: the bank statements, printed and highlighted in yellow, a photograph of the thermostat reading 9 degrees, the morphine bottle, the post-it note in his own handwriting, a printed copy of the trust amendment, cover page only, and in the center of the table, on the small wooden stand my grandfather had built himself 40 years ago from my grandmother's recipe cards, I had placed the cedar box. Square, simple, hand dovetailed at the corners. His name on a brass plate, Warren Douglas Aldridge. My husband stopped walking. He looked at the table, his eyes went to the cedar box. "What?" he said, not a question, just a word. His mother came around the corner behind him, still talking about the drive. She stopped too. "Where's Dad?" she said. She used that word deliberately. Dad, the way she always did, to remind people of a connection that she had maintained only when it was useful. "He passed Tuesday morning," I said. "He's in the box." She made a noise. A performance of a noise, specifically the kind that starts in the throat before the eyes have time to react. She pressed her hand to her mouth and looked at my husband. My husband looked at me. He had gone the kind of pale that comes from shock and calculation happening simultaneously. "Why didn't you call us?" he said. "I called you from the driveway Saturday night," I said. "I called 3 times. You answered once and told me you were at dinner and that he was tough and I should stop catastrophizing." I reached over and picked up my phone and played him the voice recording. His own voice, a little blurred with wine, saying exactly that. "I have the call log," I said. "I have all the call logs. You didn't tell us it was serious." "I also texted you Sunday morning," I said. "I told you his breathing had changed and that his care team had said this was an end-of-life pattern. You sent me a thumbs-up emoji." His mother had moved toward the cedar box. She had her hand out. "Don't," I said. She pulled her hand back. "He arranged the cremation himself," I said. 6 months ago. Paid for it in advance, through a funeral home in Sudbury because he knew he wouldn't be able to trust any of you to do it right." I paused. "There is no service. He didn't want one. No viewing. No obituary in the Muskoka Whig Standard. No casseroles, no photo boards of the Legion." He was specific. "That's not your decision," my husband started. "Actually," I said, "it is. I'm the executor of his estate as of Sunday morning." Silence. My husband's eyes moved to the document on the table. He picked it up. He read the first paragraph. His jaw tightened. "This is the trust," I said. "Patricia filed the amendment Monday morning." I let that sit for a moment. "The Muskoka property is part of the trust. That means it's not subject to probate. Patricia's office will be managing the transfer." "Transfer to who?" he said flatly. "To me," I said. He put the paper down very carefully. His mother had recovered from her performance. She was standing straight now, looking at me with an expression I recognized, the one she got when she was deciding which angle to come from. "Warren loved me," she said. "I was with him for 4 years. You were a granddaughter. You were here 4 times a year if we were lucky. Any court would see, any court would also see." I said, "The video." I turned my laptop around. It was open to a video file. Full screen, already paused at the beginning. I pressed play. My grandfather's face filled the screen. He had asked me to record him on Saturday night while Patricia was still there. He had insisted on sitting up straight for it. He had combed his hair. He was in his flannel pajamas and he still looked more dignified than anyone in that room except possibly Patricia, who was visible in the background corner of the frame, watching steadily. My name is Warren Douglas Aldridge, he said. His voice was thin but clear. I am recording this statement of my own will in sound mind on December the 17th. I want to state for the record what has been happening in this house. He listed it. All of it. Wednesday's departure, the heat, the food, the medication. He picked up the morphine bottle and held it to the camera. He described, in the plainest language, 3 days of untreated pancreatic cancer pain. He said who had refilled the bottle. He said it clearly and by name. Then he looked directly into the camera. I built this house, he said. I built the table in the kitchen and the chairs around it and the bookshelves in the hallway and the bed I've slept in for 40 years. I taught other people's children for 4 decades. I was not a burden. I was a person, and I want the record to show exactly how I was treated. He paused. He looked tired but completely himself. That's all, he said. Thank you. I closed the laptop. My mother-in-law sat down on the sofa. She sat down the way people do when their legs decide before they do. My husband was staring at the table. He wasn't looking at any one thing in particular. He was doing the same calculation I had done Saturday night on the kitchen floor, except it wasn't going the same way for him. The morphine bottle, I said, picking it up. I had the contents tested at a lab in Barrie, 100% water. I submitted the report and the bottle to the Sudbury Police Service last Tuesday. The investigating officer left me a message yesterday. They are treating it as a criminal code matter. Section 245, administering a noxious thing. Also elder abuse provisions under the criminal code. Also potentially fraud given the financial withdrawals from his pension account over the past 8 months. My mother-in-law said, very quietly, I don't know what you're talking about. Patricia has the pension statements, I said. She's very organized. My husband looked at me for the first time since the video had ended. He looked at me the way he had looked at me 3 years ago, in the parking lot of the Eaton Center, when we'd had our first real argument, and he'd realized halfway through that he was wrong. Except this time there was no walking it back. Hannah, he said, I love you. I know I have made mistakes. I know this looks bad, but you cannot be serious about going through with all of this. We're married. We can. I've already spoken to a family law lawyer in Toronto, I said. Her name is Christine. I met with her Tuesday afternoon, between the funeral home and driving back up here. She explains things very clearly. Ontario is an equalization province, which means we divide net family property, not assets. Your net family property is currently negative. I let that settle. You spent our joint account on a ski trip while my grandfather was dying without his pain medication. There is not a judge in Ontario who is going to feel warmly towards you. He was quiet. The property transfer is in progress, I said. Patricia is managing that. I am not selling it for what it's worth. I'm going to take a leave from the hospital and come up here for the winter. I looked around the room. The bookshelves, the furniture, the window with the birch trees visible beyond it. Snow still coming down soft and sideways. He built this place. I'm going to take care of it. My mother-in-law stood up. She had decided on a new angle. I could see her deciding. Warren would not have wanted this, she said. He was a gentleman. He would have wanted forgiveness. He would have wanted the family to stay together. I thought about what my grandfather had actually said, on camera, clearly, to be reviewed by anyone who needed to see it. I thought about the comb marks in his hair in that video, the effort he had made to sit up straight, the deliberate way he had held up that bottle. He made a video, I said. You watched it. He said exactly what he wanted. She picked up her bag from the floor. She looked at my husband. He looked at her. Something passed between them, the particular silent communication of people who have been shifting blame back and forth for so long, it's become a reflex. The police have both of your contact information, I said. I'd suggest not leaving the province. She walked to the front door. My husband followed her. He stopped in the hallway and turned back, and for one moment he looked young and frightened in a way that almost got to me. Almost. Where are we supposed to go? He said. It's -15 outside. Tim Hortons on the highway has free Wi-Fi, I said. You can book something from there. The door closed. I sat in the recliner for a long time without moving. The cedar box was still on the table. The birch trees were white and still beyond the window. The baseboard heaters ticked. The house smelled like old wood and cinnamon and the faint ghost of oats and peaches. I reached over and touched the cedar box with the tips of my fingers. The wood was smooth and cold and had that particular density of something built to last. "I've got it from here," I said. I meant the house. I meant the estate. I meant the months of paperwork and calls from Christine's office and police statements and whatever legal processes were coming. I meant learning how to keep the generator running in a real Muskoka winter and which neighbor to call when the lane needed plowing and how to tell in February whether the ice on the lake was safe. I meant all of it. I got up and went to the kitchen and put the kettle on. I found a tin of shortbread on the second shelf, the one he always kept topped up from Thanksgiving until New Year's. Round butter shortbread with a small indentation in the center, the same ones he'd been making from the same handwritten card for 40 years. I took one and ate it standing at the counter, looking out the kitchen window at the birch trees and the snow. Family isn't the people who show up for the inheritance. It's the people who show up when it's 9 degrees and dark, when there's nothing to gain, when the right thing is the only thing pulling them through the door. He taught me that. He taught me a lot of things. I put the kettle on and waited for the snow to stop.